But it's, again, just tells the story of it's the evil and the ugliness of people's hearts these days is everywhere.
This is Franky Rose's Think Tank. Here's your host, Franky Rose.
Hey guys, welcome to the Think Tank. So the Slender Man, she is wanting out. Morgan Geyser. Let's see how this goes. Still waiting for a verdict as far as the Apple River case goes. I'm just putting some stuff together here, guys.
We actually got to clean.
I know, Dandy. I was like, what? Thank you very much for letting me know about this. I appreciate it. I had no idea. So I'm still setting up the stream. Well, good day there, Dingo. Good to see you. Yeah, thanks again, Dandy. I'm not even a full coffee into my day. But this, I'm definitely interested in. Morgan Geyser.
That's the whole problem. I know.
Sometimes when I get things. Sorry, I was angry.
Hey, JJ. Did it, Dandy? Oh, nice. That's a good thing. I was waiting for you to say something, JJ. Ole. You guys entertain me.
He should have it in file. I'm just asking if he has, it's file right, so it's
Right.
filed.
It's already filed,
He just has to confirm it's a 9-page document.
and I don't have a physical marked copy. Do we have a clean copy? Or
I didn't bring one, the court has it, but I don't get a physical one to ask from, but I don't think they bring one.
I have a question. For the funds, and since you see me by Zoom, can you report that file, like, this is the money for the students, it's like, report.
Just about done, guys. YouTube's acting so damn weird lately. Please tell me that. Oh, duh. Okay. So I do have the tab open to watch for the Apple River case jury to come back. So they've got the volume off. Morning, Christy. Good to see you. Can you guys hear the background? For whatever reason, every time I turn on the TV, I did put on closed captions and
We'll be back on the record in State versus
take my
Oregon
banner
Geyser,
off.
same case number,
Here we go, guys.
and we'll have the same appearances. I assume that Attorney Cotton's in the area.
Yeah, he just stepped out for a second.
All right, well, then we can begin. I think, Dr. Lundbohm, you were on the stand. You want to come forward again? We'll note, as indicated, same appearances as yesterday as far as Zoom appearances are concerned. And Doctor, you're still under oath. You understand that?
Yes.
All right, thank you. And counsel, you wish to begin? Cross?
Thank you.
I can hardly hear you.
Oh, I will speak up for you.
I'll use your microphone too. That's
I thought it
why
would,
we have those.
I thought it would catch me from where it is, but is that a little better?
All right, very good.
Good morning, doctor. Thanks for being back with us here again today.
Good morning.
Just to kind of reorient us before we get into things. Fair to say that since at least August 2022, Ms. Geyser has been compliant with the rules of the institution broadly.
Yes,
As far as you're aware, she's not engaged in any acts of aggression towards herself, others, or property.
correct.
And I know your 2023 report only really dates back to October 2022, but to your knowledge, has there been any acts of aggression towards herself, others, or property since October 2021?
Right, that's the last documented incident, which is that suicide attempt.
Fair to say that the records reflect that she's been a consistent and active participant in both group and individual therapy throughout that period,
Absolutely.
and has been compliant with her medication, not just in the last 2.5 years, but historically.
Yes,
Also fair that she's been psychiatrically stable since discontinuing her antipsychotics.
what I would say is that there's now overt acute psychosis. So reemergence of those delusional ideas as they've been described, or her report of auditory or visual hallucinations as were described historically. There is ongoing concerns related to depression, anxiety, and then symptoms characteristics of post-traumatic stress.
Okay, so fair to say that signs of overt psychosis have been absent since at least she has discontinued her medication.
Yes.
From your review of the records, do you recall how long prior to discontinuing medication has she been free of psychosis?
So that's difficult to call. I would have to look back at the records. There were incidents that she had reported in 2021, fall and winter, where she described hearing voices of demons, specifically one named Abaddon. She had related at least one of her suicide attempts around that time to that particular phenomenon.
Okay, so fair to say in general, since October 2021, we've kind of seen a wholesale success story in many terms, in terms of her compliance and symptoms.
Yes, I would say that there's been a reversal in the course of her institutional adjustment. As she describes it, that suicide attempt in October 21 was quite serious and frankly scared her. And with that, She has had renewed hope for her future and has essentially realigned her adjustment at the institution with her goals, both short-term and long-term.
Now, I want to turn to kind of the big elephant in the room here regarding the kind of change in her conception of her psychosis back in 2014 and in the years following. Would you say that that is your biggest concern and what gives you kind of pause to say that she is ready for conditional release or not?
I would say it is a concern. I have several, though, as I would document in my report, but it is a significant concern as part of this particular petition.
And fair to say, neither you nor really any of the medical professionals can say for sure, you know, kind of what the truth is in terms of symptoms at the time being feigned or not, right?
Well, so what I can say is this. There is, her mental health is well documented, very closely observed from 2012 until today. As she was a juvenile, she actually had one-to-one supervision, which led her to be under close microscope, if you will, where staff was in constant communication with her, constant observation of her behavior, her adjustment. Through all of that, for several years, there was consistency in both her self-report as well as with the observations of her, which substantiated the presence of psychosis. That has alleviated. So there's also evidence of when she has taken antipsychotic medications, there was noticeable improvements with that particular treatment. So I would say that the evidence is supportive of a history of psychosis. There's also evidence of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress. There's also her young age, fantasy that can complicate things. There is indication both by her self-report, but also in the records of some exaggeration at times of symptoms, potentially to get out of things that maybe she doesn't want to partake in, or to facilitate more comfort for her in the institution.
I kind of want to go down the path of just the historical records. And there was a comment I think that Dr. Collins made yesterday, and I'm curious if you agree, that Morgan has consistently been an accurate historian when it comes to contemporaneous reporting of symptoms, impressions, issues. True?
I think that's complicated at this point. I would say prior to the reversal in course of conceptualization, that would be true. Even in my own interviews with Ms. Geyser since 2022, there's been inconsistency, both with respect to her, in the moments of those interviews and her trying to, I would say, struggle with her history of mental health and putting it into an explanatory framework. But also there's inconsistency when you compare it to her past report, the past observations. And so the reliability of her self-report at this point is a concern to me.
And that's kind of my question. I'm asking specifically about contemporaneous reporting of immediate symptoms that are ongoing in her medical records and what she's reporting. Has she been historically accurate in looking back, her self-reporting matching what is being documented by her care providers?
No, I think that the recency, the issues of the most recent years place all of that in question. So there's a real concern about whether or not she is, in fact, being forthcoming about what she's actually experiencing. As an example, within the moments of even our interview, describing essentially no history of psychosis whatsoever, really saying that her minimizing, if you will, what is well-documented, repeated incidents of heightened reactivity, intrusive memories, ongoing incidents of dissociation. And so that self-report, at least to me, was not consistent with the data that's there.
Let me ask this in a different way. What I'm trying to get at is it true that Ms. Geyser right now and in the previous months has reported anxiety symptoms, has reported PTSD symptoms as they have occurred to her treatment team and providers?
What I would say is she reports it and demonstrates it. There are times where she is demonstrating those kinds of issues, and it's been hard for her to express what is actually happening in those moments, but she's been very actively engaged in treatment and in the wake of those incidents, processing her ongoing symptoms.
Would it be fair to say that Ms. Geyser, in the moment of experiencing those symptoms, accurately describes them, articulates them to her treatment team, and her self-reporting is consistent with observed phenomena, let's say, in that moment of her actually experiencing these symptoms? Is she truthful and accurate and forthcoming about those in the moment?
It appears so.
And so the difference, I guess, in the accuracy of historical reporting for her comes in her after the fact rationalization of what has or hasn't happened. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, yes.
And this we can kind of even see in your interview of her, where she talks about feeling as if she does not have, empathy, while also expressing remorse and characterizing the things that she's disclaiming present tense. Is that true?
Right. I think that there is some inconsistency in that between what she displays versus what she is reporting. And I think she's continuing to wrestle with some of these complicated issues, and is doing so on her own, but also with her treatment team.
Do you have any concern that she is not reporting symptoms as they occur to her treatment team, present tense?
I have no information to suggest that that would be true.
You have no information to suggest that she is not reporting or that she is?
That I would have no information in the records to suggest that she's experiencing things that she has not reported to the treatment team. That said, it's also difficult because some of these things, when we're talking about a psychotic spectrum disorder, they're not tangible. The rest of us can't see or hear what she may be seeing or hearing. The rest of us don't necessarily perceive the environment the same way that she does. And so one of the things that's very important to me when considering her readiness for release is that we want her to be reliable. We want to be able to trust what she's saying so that we can put appropriate supports around her, ensure that she's doing well. The goal of conditional release is to have her in the community, not only safety for the community, but safety for her. And that reliability and being able to trust that self-report and her being able to recognize in herself is monumentally important.
Do you have any reason to doubt that she would continue to accurately report present tense to her treatment team any experiences that she's having, whether it be symptoms or difficulties, as they occur?
I'm hesitating because that's a difficult question. I think that there's not evidence to suggest that she hides symptoms. There's never been an indication of that. However, she is very, very motivated for conditional release. She's very in tune to the concerns that have been raised across time. And there is some indication of, say, wanting to change diagnoses, the labels that have been applied, which I would say are not necessarily that important, but wanting to do that out of a belief that that may assist her in her short and long-term goals.
Would you describe Morgan as someone who is very concerned about the accuracy of the particular labels that are placed on her, whether that's diagnosis or other characterizations?
It appears so.
Does this come off to you as someone that is trying to manipulate labels for the purpose of these proceedings, or someone who is very concerned as she is struggling to kind of conceptualize how her life has come to be where it is, what led her to this point?
I would say is primarily involved in the struggle to understand and understand the complicated aspects of her particular illness. It's multifaceted, is what the information suggests. There is some information, specifically from fall of 2022, that did raise some concerns about a external motivation to have the schizophrenia label removed out of a belief that that might, in fact, aid in a conditional release support.
Fair to say that if she believed that that was not an accurate diagnosis, it would still be true that removing that diagnosis and identifying whatever her correct diagnosis might be would help her conditional release petition potentially?
Don't know how to answer that. For me, the label itself is essentially a non-issue. What I look at when I'm doing conditional release evaluations is the symptoms that are being reported, but also displayed, the behavioral stability, the psychiatric stability, the factors that potentially influence decline. And so a label the labels notwithstanding, that's really what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with her insight and being able to effectively and consistently identify those factors.
Fair to say that your report indicates that the records do not suggest a pattern of covert or manipulative behavior?
Right. I don't believe that there is a pattern of manipulation or covert behavior. What's interesting is that if you take her current claims of fabrication, that would suggest significant manipulation. But again, I don't believe that to be true. I don't believe that to be supported in the record. So when you're looking at my report and doing those risk assessment instruments, I omitted that. Certainly, if completing those instruments the current self-report, that would be a different response.
On that note, is there a difference in kind of risk forecasting and risk mitigation between an individual who genuinely is not accurately self-reporting contemporaneous to the experiences versus someone who is has a revisionist history of past tense symptoms that they accurately reported at the time?
I would say that it's harder. So a revisionist history, as I think that is happening currently, it does make things harder for those around her to understand what's actually happening within her mind, within her body, to be able to react appropriately and get those supports and services around her to ensure stability and that she's doing well.
So kind of from a big picture perspective here, is it accurate that you don't believe that she malingered, or at least to an extent that the diagnoses were not accurate at the time?
Yes.
And is that the general consensus of the kind of medical and mental health team that you've reviewed reports for?
Yes, and I would say that that is the consensus for years, and numerous mental health professionals that have been involved in her care and evaluation in different roles. There's absolutely no indication to suggest a pattern of malingering.
And just to kind of more directly address a question I know the court had yesterday, and it's also been hinted at, you don't believe that Ms. Geyser faked symptoms to avoid responsibility for the index offense, correct?
Right.
Nor does the rest of her medical team and treatment providers historically, true?
True.
So the general consensus is that there were psychosis symptoms at the time, that they lasted. Is it also the case that the consensus is now that they have resolved to the extent that they've been absent for an extended period of time?
If we are looking very specifically at those specific delusional ideas that contributed to the index offense, yes, that's absolutely true, that there's been an absence of belief related to, say, Slender Man for several years. If we're talking about symptoms more broadly, there continue to be concerns.
Right, and limited to the psychosis symptoms that I think are the most unpredictable and concerning. Is it So let me ask this actually. When we're looking at potential different diagnoses, the unspecified schizophrenia diagnosis or let's say a trauma-induced childhood psychosis, what does the resolution of those look like in kind of the long term?
Before the doctor answers, I'm just going to take a brief recess.
Of course.
I thought I was going to barf on my keyboard. Lordy, lordy. Oh, lordy, lordy. I don't know if that's the judge or one of the lawyers. I hope he's wearing a mask. Or is it the guy in the pink? Cover your mouth, sir. Yes, gross at any rate. Oh, please, that cough, you guys. Oh, lordy, lordy, lordy. Yeah, she doesn't look very mentally stable there. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not trying to be judgmental, but even by the look of her hair, it looks like it's falling out at a fast pace, or she's pulling it out, or something's going on. She's lost a ton of weight. But if she's trying to unalive herself and do all this stuff in the recent past, even in the past year or so, like that doesn't tell me she's stable. I mean, these guys are very young when they did this. Definitely not what I was thinking about at that age. I was trying to put a roof over my head. You don't like the pink jacket, James? Oh, yeah, she just doesn't. Oh, my goodness. She just doesn't look mentally healthy. I'm sorry. So all these cameras now are positioned behind, it seems. I really like to see their facial expressions. Did you guys watch last night the Ann Taylor versus
We'll be back on the record.
oh, okay.
You need the question read
Moscow,
back?
Idaho.
Counsel, you need the question read back?
Yeah.
You want to
let's-
repeat it?
Let's have it read back.
Read
That's
it
all right.
back.
Hello, hello, hello. You guys had a good chat on Discord last night, it sounds like. That's good. You guys will be able to get around those platforms a lot better than me. Oh, isn't that something dandy?
I can ask again if that's quicker. No worries.
How did she find it? You find it?
It's not. It's,
Thank you very much for all that.
Yeah, I have, but it's not.
Oh, totally okay. I'll just
You'll
ask
just
again.
Just repeat it.
Yeah. So doctor, when we're looking at potential diagnosis, particular, I think the two that have come up are, childhood onset unspecified schizophrenia or psychosis induced by childhood trauma. Long-term prognosis of each. Can you kind of talk to me about the difference in those?
Sure. So if we're talking about an organic psychotic spectrum, some diagnosis or condition like a schizophrenia, so we would consider that a severe and persistent illness, one that you would expect to be present throughout the entirety of your life. Schizophrenia spectrum diagnosis would typically be treated by medications, but also certainly can be benefited with therapeutic and non-pharmacological interventions. Schizophrenia, it is different for people. I mean, we call it a spectrum for a reason. But what most people experience is that there would be a wax and wane in symptoms, potentially related to any number of factors, including stress, whether or not medications continue to be beneficial to the person or if there need to be changes. But we would expect it to be a lifelong condition. If we are talking about a post-traumatic induced psychosis, what you would be more likely to see is that there would be phases, I guess would be one way to put it. So within the context of stress, within the context of whether it's active trauma occurring or triggers or things that are reminiscent of that, you would see that wax and wane relative to the environment versus it being from the organic condition.
Is it the case that a kind of trauma-induced psychosis would eventually resolve such that when the environment or the individual, matures, progresses through their healing journey, let's say, they're no longer going to have that kind of psychosis?
If I can relate that question to Ms. Geyser and particularly, specifically. So if we're looking at that as the diagnosis where the psychotic spectrum symptoms came from trauma and stress, what we have seen with that is that she experienced long-term severe symptoms for a number of years within that context, benefited from medications, from the non-pharmacological interventions, as her environment became less chaotic, as she became more distanced from the specific stressors or traumas, we then would have seen less symptoms, improved adjustment, and not necessarily requiring the use of the antipsychotic agent. But if we're also looking at it being a trauma-induced psychosis, there's concern about the potential that those symptoms could reemerge if she is experiencing heightened stress, which is where those coping skills, the wanting to have the framework so that she's adequately able to identify and manage the stressors that may be thrown her way, because those are completely out of her control or in large part out of her control.
Is it fair to say that it is unlikely that Ms. Geyser will again face the stresses of pervasive long-term parental sexual abuse as a child?
If we're looking at that in particular, that's true. Her father is deceased, and she has indicated intention to be more independent from her family once conditionally released.
Would you agree that treatment providers, mental health staff don't really have the ability to say for certain which of these, or if there are others that contributed to the psychosis that you described that has kind of subsided?
What I would say is that there is disagreement related, if we're looking at specific diagnoses. And again, I don't know that that's the most important thing with her particular case. But if we're looking at specific labels, I would say that there's disagreement across time and providers.
So fair to say, if it is schizophrenia, for example, an organic psychosis condition, that can come and go through long periods of remission potentially, and could reemerge, true?
Certainly. I mean, it is a condition that's lifelong, and there's a number of factors that may contribute to a person experiencing deterioration, sometimes mild, sometimes more severe.
Regardless of the, I guess, diagnosis, fair to say that the treatment team and Ms. Geyser herself, like, are aware of the possibility, hypothetical or not, of symptoms reemerging at some point.
If I can tease that apart. The treatment team, those working with her, around her, are certainly aware of that, and they are monitoring for signs of those psychotic spectrum symptoms and the precursors, the more subtle signs that have been involved with the more serious or overt symptoms as well. Ms. Geyser, across time, has fluctuated in that ability. And I would say that during our most recent contact, one of the things that was concerning to me was that she altogether denied any potential that there may be a reemergence, in part because she's saying she faked it all, which again, just it's not, that just is not consistent with her history and all the abundance of information that exists.
So it is a known risk that can be monitored and mitigated, that psychosis could emerge at some point, hypothetically. Fair?
Fair.
So just kind of adding these things together, the medical team is of the agreement that there was a psychotic disorder of some type that existed at the time of the index offense, true?
Yes.
The symptoms of that have been absent without medication for a period of over a year, true?
The acute psychosis, yes, that's true.
Ms. Geyser historically has reported symptoms that have been accurately corroborated by objective observations from her treatment team when talking about present symptoms as they occur, true?
In general, yes, I would say that's very much true.
Is it fair to kind of take from that that were psychosis symptoms to reemerge that the treatment team is looking for, aware of, Ms. Geyser can be trusted to report those as they occur, consistent with her practice for the last 10 years of being honest about her symptoms, even if after the fact she kind of changes how she conceptualizes them?
I think that's where things become very complicated, given her more recent conceptualization of her own issues. The reliability has been called into question because of that. I think prior to summer, fall 2022, where she began to say that she faked it all, I would say that that's true. I think since that time and her continued push to say that those things never happened, that she was fully in control of all these symptoms that we know exist, it raises serious concerns.
And I think we're kind of blending the two issues here. I'm specifically asking about, objectively, Ms. Geyser has reported symptoms throughout the course of her life that are corroborated by the records as they occur. True?
True.
You said you do not believe she is omitting or not reporting symptoms to her care team now or previously, true?
There's no indication of that. I do have concerns about whether or not she's motivated to accurately report that, and whether or not she has the insight to even recognize it within herself if she were experiencing those kinds of things. Because at this point, she's maintaining, I faked it all, I've never had that condition, and is the accuracy, that reliability of her self-report, it's hard to know. We can't know what she's experiencing because we're not in her mind, we're not in her body. So we're reliant on her to report that to us. And it's just not, these complications, if you will, raise into question her motivation and her willingness to report those kinds of symptoms. That said, there's nothing in the documentation to suggest that she's been demonstrating delusional ideas or those flagrant signs of psychosis that were present at the past and that were related to the index offense.
And you'd agree that there's a difference between saying 10 years ago, I was not psychotic. As a 12-year-old, I faked these symptoms versus I am not experiencing any symptoms of, anxiety or other ongoing things that we know she's reported. Just the temporal difference there. Does that matter?
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
From the perspective of risk mitigation, risk management, symptom management, does it matter to the treatment team if she's reconceptualizing a decade-old events, essentially, when objectively, okay, the record establishes this is what the symptoms were, this is what she reported at the time, this is what doctors saw, this is what we all agree happened. How does her saying now, maybe I wasn't, when you objectively know that she was, impact your risk analysis of present day reporting of symptoms as they come up?
So when I've kind of wrestled with this particular petition and all the factors that exist, and it's a lot of information, in my head, I've kind of thought of there being different branches to consider because there's a number of different options, if you will, that have been floated. So if we're talking about a schizophrenia, organic schizophrenia spectrum disorder, the treatment would really rely on medication compliance, in addition to those additional non-pharmacological interventions. In that case, her risk would be lowered because she's not displaying those same symptoms. So we're able to kind of pinpoint the different factors that led to the severe violence in the past, and we're able to say those same things no longer exist. If we go down another branch with, say, trauma-induced psychosis, one of the concerns that I have is that the contemporary treatment records and the things that Ms. Geyser continues to struggle with on a day-to-day basis, those post-traumatic symptoms and characteristics remain prominent. And so if we're looking at that particular branch, the symptoms that brought her to the index offense, while improved, remain prevalent. They still exist. They are not yet ameliorated. If we go down another branch, again, and I can't emphasize enough that I do not believe this branch to be true, but if we go down the branch of I malingered, I faked it all, I was involved in this long-term, complicated manipulation of everyone around me, including the legal professionals, the evaluators, the treatment team, family, that seriously raises risk. That, frankly, that would put her risk off the charts, in part because, as she's saying now, I had control of everything and I basically was doing it for my own gain. And that puts serious question about how she came to that level of violence 10 years ago, and raises all sorts of questions and doubts about what we believe we know about her mental health, her behavior, her motivations, and kind of who she is as an individual. But again, I want to be clear that I do not believe that that branch is the reality of Ms. Geyser's situation.
When we're dealing with individuals, especially who have experienced, childhood sexual abuse and other sexual violence, is it fair to say that part of the process of treatment and healing is wrestling with the ideas of agency and autonomy and kind of reconceptualizing that?
Yes.
Would you agree that the revisionist kind of explanations that Morgan has provided recently all deal with topics where, largely speaking, she lacked autonomy and agency in her decision making?
I think that's fair.
Does conceptualizing it in that light change anything kind of about your analysis of what to make of these statements when they're coming up in the context of this struggle with autonomy, of agency that was taken from her, and they come up in therapy particularly?
Well, so what I would say in the risk assessment and the conditional release question, when a person is on conditional release, the treatment team, the community treatment team, those that are involved in supervising her are reliant on her in large part to have an accurate self-appraisal of where she's at psychiatrically and behaviorally. It requires some insight for her to be collaborating with those professionals that are around her. Because again, we can't necessarily know what's going on inside of her mind, inside of her body. Sometimes there are outward signs, but in Miss Geyser's case, we know that there's been times where she's experiencing rather severe symptoms and people around her weren't seeing it as clearly as what it, as they weren't seeing it as severe as what it really turned out to be.
Can you kind of be more specific in that last portion? What time frame are you talking about, and what people would you kind of be referring to?
Well, so for example, if we're looking at the index offense, so what we now know is what we believed we had known prior to kind of the revisionist history, if we are kind of calling it that. She has reported repeatedly that she began experiencing psychotic spectrum symptoms as early as, I think at some point she said 3, basically her first memories, and having ongoing perceptual issues where she, at that point, being a child, one, not knowing that that was unusual and that most people weren't experiencing that, but she wrestled to kind of put into context what it was that she was seeing. As an example of that, she had previously reported throughout her childhood at various times seeing this kind of shadowy figure, which prior to being introduced to Slender Man, she had called it. And that was kind of an episodic, idiosyncratic perceptual phenomenon that had occurred throughout her childhood. When she learned about Slender Man and had really become fixated on that particular character, what she had described previously was that she had essentially put what she had learned to make sense of these other idiosyncratic experiences that she had had. So became convinced that she had been seeing Slender Man throughout the entirety of her childhood, and with these different, I'll call it ghost stories that come along with that. That is in part what contributed to this fear that she had, that she was in danger and the people that she loved was in danger. And that's what led to that index offense. People around her did not know that. So these are all symptoms or issues that were brought forward after the fact. And the severity and the index offense caught everyone off guard. And that's a concern, that she was able to essentially hide, or she wasn't discussing the gravity of these experiences that she had had.
Let's be clear, though. She was being raised in a household with an diagnosed but unmedicated schizophrenic father, correct?
I don't know the logistics of that. I do know that there is a history of schizophrenia, but I don't know anything about whether or not he was medicated, not medicated, the extent of her father's illness.
And you're aware that there is a history of sexual and physical violence towards her in the household?
I'm aware of what Miss Geyser has told me about that severe trauma that was occurring.
Are you aware that there was significant history of substance abuse that her father had?
By Miss Geyser's self-report, I'm aware of that, yes.
Fair to say that the only people who would have been privy to the obvious signs of her kind of mental decline weren't really in a position or self-interested in bringing light to other things happening in the household, such that they likely ignored obvious signs?
I don't know. I don't think I can answer that.
Fair to say that her care team and treatment team and community corrections agent aren't going to be kind of in the same position of turning a blind eye to obvious things?
Right. The purpose of conditional release would be, there would be a number of professional supports around her, and in large part their role would be to be monitoring that as she's doing conditional release and readjusting to the community.
So fair to say, we're not ever going to be in a position through this process where she's just kind of let loose in the community. She's going to be under strict supervision, control of her whereabouts, GPS, compliance with medication, compliance with therapy. It's going to be a lot different than just a life that you or I live out in the community, true?
So there's different levels of support and services and supervision that would go along with conditional release. As I understand it, her team that would be in place would be looking at her specific needs and tailoring that. So, but if the question is she going to be released and just no one's looking at her and nobody's checking in? That's absolutely not what conditional release is.
Also fair to say that her conditional release team and treatment providers in general are operating under the assumption that the psychotic spectrum symptoms existed, continued to exist for a duration, may or may not recur. They're not just taking her blind word of kind of her justification 10 years later in therapy, true?
I would hope not.
So if the system works as it is supposed to, her treatment team will also be hyper vigilant of the reemergence of symptoms because of this kind of recent questioning of her own diagnoses. Fair?
I would hope so.
Okay.
I obviously can't predict what other clinicians in the future may or may not understand of her particular situation, but certainly I would hope that anyone working with her is well-versed in her history, because it is complicated. And there are a number, as I described it before, it's multifaceted. And so wanting anybody that's involved in her care, having her best interest in mind to understand the different complications or symptoms that have been prevalent, whether it's related to psychosis, trauma, depression, anxiety, otherwise.
Would it be fair to say that Morgan has historically, and let's call it since October 2021 and onward, been compliant with treatment, medication, and basically anything she is instructed to do, even if she is hesitant or doesn't believe that it is, helpful to her? She follows through anyways, correct?
I think it depends on which aspect of her treatment you're looking at. I would say that that's true with respect to mental health treatment, certainly. She is very active in treatment. She's very engaged. She is, in general, responsive to the recommendations of her treatment providers. In the midst of that larger context, there has been resistance and unwillingness to do, say, specific interventions or different kinds of, say, different methods of therapy, if you will. If we're talking about medical issues, there has been I don't want to necessarily say non-compliance, but a higher reluctance to follow through with the recommendations that exist.
If she's compliant with treatment, compliant with mental health care, compliant with medication, and less eager to be compliant when it comes to just physiological medical things, does that impact her suitability for release?
In her case, I believe it does. And the reason why I say that is one of the things that we are aware of with Miss Geyser, some of these more subtle symptoms or warning signs relate to somatic issues, somatic complaints. And in the last, so really focusing in on what's been going on since the August 2023 evaluation to present, there have been a number of vague generalized complaints about pain, and different medical assessments have not been able to reveal a specific cause for that. And there has been a pattern of essentially rejecting the different treatment options that exist for her. And that is concerning to me because of that history of psychosomatic complaints being indicative of her mental illness.
When her symptoms were present, her psychotic symptoms and spectrum symptoms, was there accompanied random pain? Is there a history of pain being a predictor for her symptomatic nature at all?
There's a history of psychosomatic concerns in terms of, as she has described it, kind of heightened body sensations, having discomfort related to her body. And so these psychosomatic concerns that exist in the records and most recently, I don't necessarily know what to make of it. I'm not a medical doctor. I did not examine her with respect to the etiology of these pain issues, but they are described in the records as psychosomatic, and that is a concern given history.
Would such descriptions of bodily discomfort and pain be inconsistent with long-term childhood sexual abuse?
Hard to know. The childhood sexual abuse, certainly, the trauma, it can look different for different people. So certainly it could very much be a symptom of the trauma. And I would say in her case, she's described it as that at times.
So your position is essentially we can't rule out that it might be a component of psychosis symptoms despite other reasonable explanations, so we're just going to treat it as if it's a risk? Is that fair?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that there's uncertainty related to that at this point. And it's flags, it's red flags in the records that continue to exist. And it's certainly described by her medical providers as being, at least in part, psychosomatic in nature. Whether it's because of the trauma, because of anxieties, because of something else, I don't know, but it exists. And it is a red flag in light of the totality of information that exists related to her mental health conditions.
How long has it existed?
I can't recall when she first had reported that. I would have to look back at the records, but certainly it's been a prominent theme throughout the more recent months.
Has it extended into previous years?
I don't recall. I would have to look back. Again, it certainly is prominent in the more recent records.
It's been referenced, I think, a couple times that one of the major concerns that you have are kind of the prevalence and ongoing nature of PTSD symptoms. True?
True.
Can I have you elaborate a little bit more on what that looks like? Fair that PTSD symptoms aren't simple anxiety or feeling worried as someone would kind of conceptualize it without experiencing that. True?
True.
What are PTSD flashbacks?
So PTSD flashbacks, again, it can look different for different people, but for Miss Geyser, she reports being flooded with essentially memories of past incidents of trauma and essentially reliving it. So feeling as though she's back in that place.
Is it true that one of the defining features of PTSD flashbacks is the brain's inability to distinguish between present tense threat and what other people would just experience as a past tense traumatic memory?
Right, a flashback, it's that reliving it, feeling as though you're actively experiencing that distress, that experience.
So her brain thinks that's happening as the flashbacks occur, true?
Yes.
And these flashbacks have been reported to include things as, including violent sexual assaults from her childhood, fair?
I don't know that I would characterize it as that, but certainly sexual assault incidents or sexual abuse that she experienced.
You mentioned in some of the specific incidents that you raised, particularly one that I wanted to ask you about, in which in the middle of the night, she wakes up, comes out of her room, and seems extremely upset and disoriented. Fair to say that a common feature of PTSD flashbacks is that they occur during sleep periods?
Certainly can, and it's there were a couple of those just looking at the last several months of these kind of episodic dissociative events in the middle of the night where she comes out of the room appearing to be very fearful, having difficulty communicating what's happening. Staff attempting to respond and to provide comfort, and being essentially once able to communicate, being very, very tearful. And these are, I wouldn't say frequent, but they still occur, and they certainly have occurred several times in just the last, say, 6-month period.
Fair to say that in these incidences, she is waking up and has the both physical and mental sensations of having literally just woken up from being sexually assaulted?
I don't know. That hasn't been described as what she's reported with that, but I would say the records are, the records just don't include that information, and I don't know.
True that she told the staff during one of them that you mentioned where she had trouble regaining her voice that she felt like something was inside of her?
Can I just peek at my report?
Yes.
Thank you. Actually, are you able to direct me to which bullet point or which page that might have been on?
Let me find that particular one because I know we're talking about a couple of them.
Yeah, I have it specifically flagged in my report in my file.
Yep, let's look at page 16, second to last bulleted paragraph.
Yes, okay. So that was December 26th of 2023, when she exited her bedroom at night. The staff described her as being very tense, hyper aware. She stepped back quickly. She was described as being quite tearful, appearing to be fearful. She then was, as they described it, digressed into discussion about her history of sexual abuse. They described that conversation as being hyper verbal and tangential. She described some distress related to the ongoing difficulty of her family relationships. And the quote that they included at that time was, "I try to be quiet in my room, but I fall asleep and then wake up and feel as like there's something inside of me."
Is it accurate that these types of PTSD flashbacks are relatively common occurrence among individuals that have complex PTSD due to childhood sexual assault?
It's a characteristic. I don't know that I would necessarily say that it's common, but it's certainly a characteristic.
Fair to say she's on a medication particularly to help her sleep through these kinds of flashbacks?
Yes.
And that's Prazosin, correct?
Yes. As well as I believe she takes melatonin to help with sleep.
And just kind of for context, what was PTSD referred to as, known as, prior to gaining its kind of current label? PTSD used to be called shell shock, right?
Oh, long time ago, yes.
So we're talking about a condition that was discovered after individuals came back from the traumas of war. True?
Right. So I say that as in the field, the initial conceptualization of what we would now consider post-traumatic stress disorder. There's been a number of changes over time, but initially it was very specific to wartime trauma and the distress, the symptoms that people were experiencing within that context. Since that time, it's much, the understanding of it is different. The conceptualization is much wider. So it's no longer just limited to, say, wartime experiences, but it also can relate to, and say in Morgan's case, claims of sexual abuse and trauma occurring in childhood.
I guess what I'm trying to highlight is this isn't just bad memories of past events that somebody's struggling to handle. True?
There's aspects of that, but no, it's more complicated than that.
Some of the physical descriptions that you flagged, one in particular jumped out at me. Let me see if I can find where it was. So it is a comment that Ms. Geyser made about not wanting to go outside very much because the sun feels weird. The sun makes her skin feel weird. True?
True.
Prazosin has a known side effect of causing sun sensitivity, does it not?
I don't know.
Are you familiar with it causing difficulty regulating heat?
I don't know.
So you can't rule out that those are the causes of some of these weird physical sensations that you described as potentially problematic?
No, and I wouldn't necessarily say that that in and of itself is some kind of indicator of acute psychosis or something. The reason why I included that was, one, it was a notable incident in the records, and wanting the court to have the information that exists in full of what I reviewed. But also that stood out to me in part because by Ms. Geyser's own description of warning signs is that she experiences kind of hypersensitivity to things like the sun. And so again, not saying that that's indicative of decline, but it is notable in light of all the information that we know about her history.
So there was some talk yesterday, and I kind of want to pick up on specific incidences that you've included, but just more broadly about discontention that Ms. Geyser had with her therapist over the past, let's call it a year, year and a half. True?
Can you maybe rephrase the question?
You testified yesterday that Ms. Geyser was critical of her therapist's qualifications and skill and helpfulness broadly.
During the moments of our interview, certainly, there's been times where she has spoken to other individuals in a much more optimistic manner about her therapy.
You repeatedly referenced a therapist being no longer available. What's your understanding of that therapist's, I guess, status as an employee of the hospital?
Well, I want to be clear that it's not my role to investigate or to really communicate about a specific employee at an institution that I'm not out of, but anticipation of this particular hearing and in light of Ms. Geyser's report to me during the interview, I did follow up with the deputy director of Winnebago about those particular claims. And as I understand it, there was a allegation of some kind of ethical breach, if you will, that resulted in that particular individual being essentially sidelined as there was an investigation. As I have understood it, and again, I want to be very clear that I am not related to Winnebago and I don't have intimate or personal knowledge of this, but from what was communicated to me was there was an investigation, the allegations were not founded, and the particular staff member is on now a different unit, in part because of the damage that the allegations and the investigation made to her relationships with the patients on the unit she had been working on.
And just to be clear, as far as you're aware, Ms. Geyser has nothing to do with those allegations, correct?
Correct. It was alarming to her, certainly. And I think in the moments, so that was something that had just happened. And I think in the moments of our interview, she was wrestling with kind of what she had been hearing from peers about this particular therapist and knowing that this was a person that she had worked with for quite some time and had a strong therapeutic relationship with.
So reevaluating some past interactions with the context of knowing this person was sidelined, all but fired for purposes of her therapy, true?
Right. So as I understand it, and again, I have no personal knowledge of this other than what's been communicated to me, is that this particular individual, there were some allegations, it was investigated. The allegations were not substantiated, but because of the harm that has occurred in the therapeutic relationship with the people that she had been working with, the institution had transferred her to a new unit, but is not fired. As I understand it, she continues to work there.
So fair to say her issues were with this therapist individually, not broadly with her willingness to engage in individual or group therapy, true?
True. And I really want to focus on that this was something that had just come up. And I think some of the comments that she made to me in the interview can be put into that context where she was trying to wrap her head around some of these allegations within the context of her own therapy and her own trust of this individual, and feeling as though her therapy had been violated.
So kind of in that context, do you believe that those kind of disclosures to you, those thoughts, are cause for concern in kind of the big picture compliance with therapy?
No, big picture is that Ms. Geyser, especially since October 2021, has been very active and engaged in treatment. She has been putting forth great effort in being proactive in her treatment. She has a number of goals, both short-term, long-term, and she is engaging in behaviors toward those goals, wanting to meet those goals.
Kind of on a similar vein, you note that in July of 2023, Ms. Geyser wanted to leave the social anxiety group, believing that it wasn't helpful to her or something about it was not really working. Fair to say that she didn't just quit going or refuse to participate when she started having those thoughts?
She had asked to be removed from that particular group, but absolutely, she continued to be engaged in her treatment overall.
So she wrote a written letter requesting to be reassigned, essentially, correct?
Yes, to be removed from that group and to be allowed to do different activities during that same time frame.
So she had a concern that she raised through the appropriate channels in an appropriate way and complied with treatment in the meantime until a decision was made. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Does anything about that incident cause you concern?
In and of itself, not necessarily. However, again, when we're looking at that big picture, we do have information where she has resisted having specific diagnoses. And there was an indication at some point where she had mentioned that she had faked social anxiety as well to essentially get out of groups. And that would be concerning if this was another effort to essentially escape some kind of programming. But I don't know that that's the case. She has described it as, I've done groups that were similar to this and I wanted to spend my time in a manner that was different.
And even on the context of faking social anxiety, like we're talking about specific days of specific groups that she just wanted to skip, correct?
I don't know.
Okay. Fair to say that having the anxiety symptoms and kind of using that as an excuse to skip class once or twice essentially isn't the same as, interpreting that to mean, oh, I'm faking all of my psychiatric symptoms. Fair?
Fair.
Okay. So a number of specific statements that we've discussed now over the last 2 days that have raised concern, those have happened in the context of one-on-one therapy, typically, correct?
Could you be more specific?
Particularly kind of her views of her own capacity for empathy or, manipulation. Those kinds of comments occurred during one-on-one therapy, true?
Certainly a number of them have. If I recall, there was also some statements during contacts with other treatment staff, such as nursing staff.
Fair to say that those came in the context of her communicating with her treatment team, whether that be nursing staff, doctors, individual therapists, whatever.
Yes.
In many of these cases, is it also true that then later therapy sessions kind of went through and unpacked those kind of very black and white statements and revealed that what she said isn't quite, what she actually believes or means?
What I would say is this: I don't know that each statement was unpacked or really processed in therapy, but it has been a theme as a part of her individual therapy, where kind of addressing this disconnect of at times viewing herself as unempathetic, where the data just doesn't support that. She's actually on a day-to-day basis described as having some idiosyncratic interpersonal things, but in general is capable of remorse, capable of empathy. There's not indication of, say, an antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy.
Is it fair to say introspection broadly is a learned socialized skill? We're not innately able to look at our feelings and kind of dissect them and what they mean?
I would say in general, yes, I do think that there is some organic things that come along with individual humans that allow some people to do it better than others. But in general, it's a skill that people are taught, learn, and it's a process that humans continue throughout their lifetime.
Fair to say that Ms. Geyser's upbringing in the institution really presents a very different picture and process of learning these socialization skills that kind of leads to these sorts of things coming up now as an adult in therapy, where a younger individual might have been redirected and taught the proper ways to interpret kind of what she was trying to express.
I think that's an absolutely fair characterization. She has, at no fault of her own, but because of institutionalization, not had the same opportunities that many adolescents have in terms of developing and maintaining age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate relationships, being able to problem solve the things that adolescents experience. And again, no fault of her own, but I think that's a fair characterization.
Fair to say, I guess, in particular with Ms. Geyser, that there seems to be a concerted effort to really understand and characterize herself in ways that allow her to make sense of things that she did as a child, for instance, that I guess are abhorrent to think about now.
Yes, I think that she continues to wrestle with a lot of her history and the different factors contributing to her childhood and what she says she experienced, to the specific index offense, to all of these different experiences that she's had since that time.
And many of these statements kind of come in the form of, if I did this thing in the past, I must not be capable of empathy, remorse, whatever, and not necessarily. So she's drawing that conclusion based on things that she knows she's done and has to make mental peace with, versus actually saying, no, I've never felt remorse, I've never X, Y, and Z, because she does report remorse, right?
So it's hard to unpack that because there's a variety of different similar statements. I think if you're referencing a very specific comment that she had, I believe it was in October, that particular statement had context related to making it. Comments about not being able to care for other people, not being able to feel, that has been repeated across time at various points, being driven by different things occurring in her life. Again, the totality of information doesn't support that. The totality of information, her day-to-day functioning suggests that she's very much an empathic person and is able, she feels a lot. Actually, that's one of the concerns, is that she can be sensitive and is prone to episodic distress that interferes with her kind of day-to-day functioning. So that being callous, she's described as having some clumsy moments socially, and potentially saying some things that maybe did not come across the way that she intended it, but there's nothing to suggest, again, say psychopathy or an antisocial personality structure.
So when looking at kind of these statements from a treatment perspective, or just broadly, like, we shouldn't be taking these as face value red flags of something being wrong with her, true?
I think looking at any person, whether it's Ms. Geyser or otherwise, looking at one specific incident without having context and greater understanding would be a dangerous thing to do. One of the things that's important, especially with Ms. Geyser, and because her particular mental health conditions are multifaceted and pretty complicated, it's really important to look at those things within the context of not only what's happening in the environment at that particular moment, but within the context of her particular mental health conditions and the totality of her adjustment and functioning across time.
Kind of final thought as to the comments that we're talking about. Fair that these and similar comments often come at times of, well, we would presume that Morgan's feeling defensive about something that had happened.
That comment certainly in October of 2023 certainly came within a context of heightened emotionality. At that particular time, she had been confronted with some concerns about her interactions with others during group therapies. In response to the feedback that she had been given, became quite defensive, and then from there digressed into conversation about her reported abuse history, about her difficulties and the stressors that exist at Winnebago. And then she made that, within that context, she made that particular statement relating to the index offense and her co-defendant.
And in how you kind of interpret these, does it make a difference to you whether comments like this are made in a heightened emotionally defensive posture, or like in a calm therapy session where she's reflectively trying to explore these issues? Like, would you treat those same statements as having different levels of risk or red flagginess, we'll say, based on just the context and timing of when they're made?
Context absolutely matters. And again, I would say that taking any individual incident or observable any thing that's kind of documented in those records, taking it in and of itself would be dangerous to do. The context matters, as does that larger understanding of her and her particular history of mental health and behavior.
The last question I have for you, it kind of runs back to the first topic we discussed of the care team's understanding and consensus surrounding her history and her present lack of symptoms in general, and the relative confidence that we have in the self-reporting of events as they occur versus the historical reporting. If you were confident that Ms. Geyser would faithfully self-report symptoms as they occur, even if she doesn't necessarily agree with how to interpret those, would that change your assessment of her readiness for conditional release?
That's just one factor of a number of concerns that I have. So certainly that's something that I'm looking for. I am concerned about that fact in particular, but there's also additional factors, as I've detailed in the report and through testimony, that also exist.
Thank you. I think that is all I have for you.
All right, thank you. Any redirect?
Just very briefly, Judge. Doctor, it sounds like what you've described today, that there exists a current conflict in what caused the violent index offense in this case. Do you agree with that?
I think that there is a discrepancy in what Ms. Geyser currently understands and is reporting versus what exists in the records and is well documented. So I think those who have been involved in the evaluations, her treatment across time in general, and consistently have viewed her as a person who has genuine mental health symptoms, and there's not any reason to believe that she faked it all.
Do you think that that inconsistency in this case is a fundamental one that needs to be resolved before she would be released?
I do. As I had talked about, when a person is on conditional release, that person does not have the same structure and support that is available to them in the institution. So say in Ms. Geyser's case, nursing staff or the staff that work day to day on the units, or even her treatment team, being able to respond immediately when she's experiencing distress. In the community, her treatment team and those around her are reliant on her insight and her ability to accurately appraise her mental health and to be able to communicate those potential issues so that they can respond appropriately and she can respond appropriately and make sure that that she's doing well.
Doctor, it's been suggested that despite this incongruency with Ms. Geyser herself, the fact that the treatment team has access to all these records and information mitigates any kind of risk, regardless of what Ms. Geyser thinks herself. Do you agree with that?
I don't agree with that.
Why?
So again, if you're kind of looking back at those instruments that include empirically based risk factors for violence, future violence, those clinical factors in large part address some of these same issues. And the fact that these clinical factors continue to exist and are quite prominent, that raises concerns for me about her readiness.
That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any further direct or just be any further cross?
Just to kind of put a point on this, the discrepancy that you describe is between kind of what we factually know happened, what the medical consensus is, and what Ms. Geyser now kind of post hoc describes having happened, correct?
Correct.
There's no controversy among her care team as to the fact that she was suffering from psychosis of some form during the index offense and in the years following, true?
Correct. The disagreement that may exist amongst the different professionals relate to labels. Again, the labels, in my opinion, are not as important as what we know about the symptoms, the behavior, the response to treatment, her engagement in treatment. And there's no disagreement amongst those who have been involved in evaluation or her treatment, as at least I understand the records, to suggest that she's got genuine illness.
And the state asked you about whether kind of there's been complete mitigation of risk because the care team has records. Fair to say that in the context of conditional release or just any treatment regimen, risk is never fully mitigated. It's just planned for. Fair?
Fair.
It's fair to say that the care team has the knowledge, information, and experience to disregard Ms. Geyser's self-assessment of her 10-year-old condition and apply their own beliefs as to what happened and make a plan and treatment regimen consistent with those professional opinions and beliefs. True?
I don't know that I can say that that's true. When we are working with people, and again, I'm saying we as in kind of the field and as treatment providers, it requires collaboration with the individual. And so you would ideally have a person who is invested in treatment, as she is. I don't mean to imply that she's not invested in treatment, but that also though has the ability to consistently give an accurate self-appraisal and to be able to communicate. So again, the treatment team can make decisions and put the appropriate supports and services to ensure that not only the community is safe, but that she's safe.
Final point. Fair to say that Ms. Geyser is compliant with treatment, medication, and rule conformity?
Objection outside the scope.
Overruled. Witness can answer.
Largely, I would say that's true.
And fair to say that she does what she's told, even if she doesn't particularly agree with the approach. Fair?
Not always, but I would say largely she is treatment compliant. When we're talking about specific interventions or recommendations, there is resistance and there have been times where she's not followed through on that, but largely she's very engaged in treatment. She is motivated toward her goals.
And she would have a conditional release team that includes therapists, psychologists, a conditional release coordinator, and DOC coordinator that would be telling her what to do, essentially. Fair?
In general, that would exist. The conditional release plans, as I understand it, they are developed specifically tailored to the individual. So there may be additional services or supports. There may be different levels of supervision or rules, but it's specifically tailored to her.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Any further direct? No. All right. Thank you, doctor. Now, her report is Exhibit 4. Has that been moved in?
If it hasn't, I would move it in.
No objection.
Okay, Exhibit 4 is received. Thank you.
And may I be excused?
Yes, you may. We'll take at this point, you can have a seat. Are you under subpoena?
I don't believe I was subpoenaed.
All right, thank you. Otherwise, have a good day. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
What's the status of this state proceeding?
The state is not intending to call any other witnesses, Judge, so the state would rest.
Okay, state rests. Then we'd move to Ms. Geyser's presentation. What's the plan for Ms. Geyser?
Thank you, Judge. We'll call our witness Kenneth Robbins. He's the third doctor that prepared a report, and he'll be available by Zoom. He's ready to go.
All right, well, let's take about a 10-minute recess. Come back at
I just wanted to note that Exhibit 3 was not on the record either.
I have Exhibit 3 marked as, yeah. That's the
Did I?
CV. Any objection? If not, the
No
objection
objection.
will receive Exhibit 3. So let's, it's about 1:45. Let's come back at 11. Court will be in recess.
Well, there you go. I don't know, you guys. I'm not thinking she should be getting out. Her mind doesn't seem prepared for the outside world. Just because she has these things set up does not mean she has to participate, right? Are they going to come grab her and put chains on her? Look at her hair. Oh, my word. I hope not. I hope you're right. Yeah, just because she's got this set up doesn't mean, oh, Lordy, doesn't mean she's going to participate. Are you serious, Tony? Amanda Knox is in trouble in Italy again. Why would she go back there after the deletion case? Did she go back, or are they making her go back? Why is she in trouble again? I have so many questions. Amanda Knox again. Who is Amanda Knox, and why is she facing a slander trial in Italy? What? So I'll read this to you guys. Amanda Knox is facing another trial in Italy this week in connection to a slander conviction for wrongfully alleging that a bar owner deleted her 21-year-old British roommate back in 2007. It's just about 20 years. It's 17 years ago. So she's 36 now, and she had planned to appear at Wednesday's retrial at a Florence appeals court, but remained in the U.S. to take care of her 2 young children, one of whom was born recently. Italy's top court has ordered the retrial in October of Knox. After Knox appealed her slander conviction to be overturned, the legal challenge was made possible after a 2022 reform of Italy's Code of Criminal Procedure. Knox became a household name at age 20 after she and her then boyfriend, Raphael Solicito, were convicted of deleting following the deletion of her roommate, Meredith Kircher. Knox and Kircher shared an apartment in Perugia. Well, the latter was on an Erasmus year abroad. During this time, Kircher's body was discovered in her bedroom with her throat and 40 pokes and signs of SA. Patrick Lumumba, I don't know how to say this, Congolese bar owner who had employed Knox, was arrested in November 2007 after Knox accused him of deleting Kircher. Lumumba spent 2 weeks in jail before a witness provided him with an alibi. Knox was then convicted on charges of MSA and slander, while Solicito was convicted for M and SA. They both spent almost 4 years in jail before their release in 2011. Italy's highest court overturned the conviction in 2015 in light of glaring errors in the case, but Knox's defamation conviction for falsely implicating Lumumba has remained until now. Knox has asked for the slander conviction to be dropped in light of a 2019 European Court of Human Rights ruling, which determined that her rights had been violated during police questioning. Lawyers for Knox argued that she made allegations against Lumumba under police duress with no legal assistance or an interpreter. The ECHR also ruled that the Italian legal system should pay Knox $20,000 in financial damages. A third defendant, Rudy Gude, who was from the Ivory Coast but moved to Italy as a child, was charged with Kircher's M at the same time as Knox and Solicito. Guad's DNA matched a swab taken from Meredith Kircher, like an SA type swab. And after seeking his own fast track trial, separate from Knox and Solicito, Guad was originally sentenced to 30 years, but was later reduced. Guad was freed on parole November 2021 after completing 13 years of a 16-year sentence. He is currently under investigation for physical and SA of an ex-girlfriend. Lordy. She really is. She really is. Yes, sounds like slander. Like 17 years after the fact. I don't know about that. Pretty dumb to go back. It sounds like she hasn't left the US. That's what I'm thinking. I mean, really? Can you go back 17 years for a slander charge? Wouldn't there be some kind of time factor involved? Like there's usually, I think one of the only ones that would last 17 years would possibly be an M charge or attempted M, something like that. But slander? I mean, I don't know that they're guilty. Amanda and her ex. I don't know that they're guilty. And if the other guy's DNA was in a SA swab, it's very possible that in her mind that the bar owner might have had something to do with it. It's very possible. I don't know. It's been a while since I looked at that case, but when it was all happening, I kept kind of tabs on it. But it's been a long time. She oofed. So I don't even know. Can they deport her? Can they deport her? I would think so. You'd think that they would have time restrictions, wouldn't you? Wow. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, I don't know if they can drag her back there or not. I don't agree with it just because of what the charge is. It's been too long. I wish they would show us this girl's face. I want to see Morgan Geyser's face. I wonder if they'll put her in the stand. That would be interesting. June 5th. So is that for Amanda Knox? Look at you guys, just full of information for me this morning. I love it. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. Amanda Knox. You guys are awesome. Okay, I got it. Summer's going to be busy. Holy. Me either. Me either. But I'm thinking if they can haul somebody from a different country because of slander, there's something going on that's not quite right. If that's all they've got is slander. I feel sorry for this girl in here if she's mentally ill. I do. They're having a good conversation. There seems like zero stress. Like as far as her being a whack job. I don't like that we can't see her expressions. Oh, okay, Christy. You know who? Which one do you know? Welcome, collector. Who is it you know? You do. You do. So do tell. Is she ready to get out? She's an artist? Oh, you've met her many, many times. Okay. What do you think? Is she ready to get out? I don't know her. I mean, if you know better than we do, if you know her personally. Did you start writing her while she was at the hospital? I believe she was ready last year. This year, it seems though she's made changes. I feel as though this story about she made it all up. It's nonsense. She just coerced herself years. She made a big mistake with all these story changes. I'm going to put those up, friend. So possibly she should be getting more help. I mean, like I said, I don't know her, collector, but I'm worried about her being released. Not only for society, but I'm worried for her too. You know, when they say Morgan has someone in their 40s, that's, oh, is it? I've never heard that because this is really the first time I've looked at this case. So are you guys are boyfriend, girlfriend type thing? Well, welcome, Jeffrey. Welcome. Nice to meet you. So you guys are boyfriend, girlfriend type thing, or are you guys buddies? Yeah, nice meeting you. I have not followed this. It's been quite a while. So, I mean, since it happened, yeah. I mean, I do know schizophrenics that are out and about. I do. But they haven't crossed that line. Close friends. Honestly, her and I are stepping away. She is overly focused on me, and I need her to focus on her mental health and imminent release. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, no, that's okay. No labels needed. No labels needed. It's all about right now. It's all about her mental health and will she follow all of the different rules that they've laid down for her. I mean, the medication is the biggest thing, of course. Is she at that spot, do you think? What I find with the people that I've met is, they go on their meds for a while, and then for whatever reason, they start believing that they don't need them. And that's when things go a little bit sideways. But yeah, I mean, stepping back and letting her try to deal with her mental health and her upcoming release. When I knew her last year, she looked much healthier. She is schizophrenic. She's denying because her father was. Her father is a monster, not Slender Man. But she will not accept that diagnosis. I gotcha. Gotcha. So yeah, she needs to do a little bit more work, right? And I do. I feel bad for her sitting there because a lot of times these people with these different illnesses, like you said, they won't accept it. And then you run into trouble, right? Because then you won't take your meds. She stayed inside a Winnebago until her dad died. Oh, Lordy. Oh, Lordy. I don't know. I mean, you're going to know better than I. Should she feel safe outside in the real world? You see her sitting there, and I can just imagine how badly she wants this to go her way. But it's all a matter as if she is ready for it. I know so much. She is a victim to the same degree. Her dad is a POS. I think she is not ready from what I've seen. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I don't know her personally, obviously. I'm in Canada, but she looks like possibly she's still in distress, right? She may feel safe in the outside world, but what about everybody else? She deleted kids' parents, don't get to fix their kids. Yeah. Yeah, I remember when this happened, and these girls, they believed this whole Slender Man thing. Like, they believed this whole Slender Man thing. She has not been violent to anyone but herself since the crime. And is that when she's on medications or not medications, Jeffrey? She's a danger to herself. That's, yeah. Yeah, her hair. I mean, it does look like she's been pulling it out. But I'm not sure, right? I'm not sure. A danger to herself. And that's no good either. That's no, I mean, when these girls did this, they were young. What, 12? Yeah, there's that too, Tony. So if a guy in prison for deleting someone doesn't delete someone in prison, they should be let free, not buying it. But the other girl's out, Tony. So I'm almost thinking they just have to get her to a point where her mental health is where it should be. And if they can do that, I don't know if they will be able to, but if she can do that, if the other girl's out, if her sentence was 16 years, yeah, she's been out for 2.5 years. So now it's all about her mental health. You know, in my mind. But based on just visually, she doesn't look like she is ready. Just visually. You know, I wish we could see her face. But schizophrenia is a bad one. You know, not her fault. And if her dad was a severe schizophrenic, right? You'd sleep in the same room with her. I always felt safe around her. Okay. Is she gentle? Is she a gentle person? She looks like it. She was so kind, loving, happy, lots of energy. Wow, hey. Yeah. She looks like she's gentle. That's the scary thing, Tony. There's always going to be a relapse. And not necessarily is she going to do what she did, but at this point, we don't want her to unalive herself either. She's right, very gentle, seriously one of the kindest individuals I've ever met. Jeffrey, how'd you find my channel? I mean, it's great to have you. You're very, very interesting person. I like what you have to say. I'm just curious how you found my little channel. Very gentle. Seriously, one of the kindest individuals I've ever met. Oh, you just searched. Is that right? Oh, thank you, Ruth. Welcome. Welcome to the family. Nice to have you. You searched for her name and I came up. I'm glad you found us. I'm very glad you found us. Yeah, we're pretty relaxed around here. Good bunch of people, great sense of humor. And really all we want is the best for everybody. You know, all the way around. I mean, some cases it's like, what? But yeah. Many places treat her like a monster, and it's hard for me to be there. Sometimes I fight hundreds. I get that. No, hey, that's okay, Jeffrey. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. Don't forget to hit that bell, friend. Oh, that's great. That's great, Jeffrey. Bunch of kind-hearted and kind-souled people in the think tank. So yeah, welcome.
The one we're in. is right here. It's
I'm
this
going to
courtroom and
mute
the
out.
courtroom next to us, Judge Domina's courtroom. So we'll participate regardless of what we're doing at 1:45. We'll stay here. There may be other people joining us in the building, and we'll just participate in it until it's over. So I anticipate 10, 15 minutes. So look forward to it, be excited about it, and we'll see what happens. All right.
Judge,
So then now,
I guess I have a question.
yes.
about-
Guys, I am going to pause this and we're going to come back. They have a verdict. So I will see you guys shortly. There is a verdict in the Apple River case. See you there.